It is Thursday, August 29th, 2024, and you're watching the MMA Eco Live podcast live from Portland, Oregon. I'm your host, Chris Presnell, owner of MMA Ecosystem and employee at Tapology. And really, guys, my whole purpose with this project, this experiment, is to bring the world of Asian MMA closer to your social media feed, your web browser, all that good stuff. So, coming off of a week of in-person coverage in Las Vegas for Road to UFC, the semifinals, had a great time there. I'll get a little bit more into that here in a minute. I did a live show last week where I kind of gave you an update on how things were going, and I'll share a little bit more about how that went. And but the way it's going to work, I'll talk about that in a second. I'll also talk about Matrix Fight Night coming up this weekend. Pretty solid card of Indian talent, as well as the kind of recapping Wang Cong's really big knockout bonus winning UFC performance last weekend. That was her her UFC debut. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, hit a thumbs up on the video, and then we can get started here. So last week I was in Las Vegas, made the 15-hour drive down from Portland over 2 days, made a pit stop in beautiful Crater Lake National Park. Boy, that was a really fun drive. And then the next day drove about 7 hours across the desert from Reno, Nevada down to Las Vegas. And there were a lot of unknowns about the week, and some things I knew I'd be at, like the weigh-ins and the actual event, but some of the other things were a little more up in the air. They're flexible. Really, I just wanted to be there for whatever kind of opportunities arose. And I would say overall as a whole, really, really happy I went, and I feel like could really be like a turning point, at least for like how things can go for the MMA ecosystem brand. However, I decided to take things from here. So the door is open to keep going to future UFC Endeavor owned events. Just going to plug in my laptop real quick. So yeah, that was really cool. And I really enjoyed getting to meet a lot of the UFC staff. Got to, I think, have some good talks with the UFC PR team, and also got to meet a lot of the UFC Asia staff from social media, people who manage social media to travel, and then got to connect with Dean Amasinger. That was great. And that was really big. Definitely, like, the highlight was the in-person connections. Those are things that are hard to like really quantify. They're hard to like you can't really produce content from it most of the time, but like those were really good. And I would say the other really big takeaway, which if you're wondering why you're going into this, I've covered live MMA events before. I've covered Bellator. I've covered Invicta multiple times. I've covered some regional Kansas City events multiple times. But this was kind of the first first time I really saw it. First UFC event that I was covering in person. Also, the first time I was gonna really have space for more networking. It was a longer trip. I think I was there Tuesday through Saturday morning. So it was a longer trip. And I would say probably, like, if there was a disappointment of the trip, is that the interviews that I was hoping to pull off did end up working out, which I think mostly really wasn't up to me in a lot of ways. It wasn't that people didn't want to give me interviews. It was just that schedules were kind of floating around. Also, with Road to UFC, there was literally not space in the schedule for post-fight interviews with each winner. And then there was also not a post-fight press conference. There was also not a media day for the athletes. So there really wasn't any space to like get time with those particular athletes, at least this time around, which was really fine. The trip was still beyond worth it, even without that. But I did really want to like maximize being there because I can always turn on my TV, can pull up my laptop, hook it up to a monitor, and I can create like UFC coverage of like article, like a results article, a live tweeting, creating Instagram posts for the winners, that kind of stuff. I can do in from anywhere. So I really wanted to maximize being there. And I would say Wednesday last week, well, I mean, really every day, but I got a lot of really good time with some folks. I was a couple friends invited me over to the Fighter Hotel to basically just like, I would just get coffee with people or whatnot, and not even these aren't folks that you would necessarily know, but are really, really, really influential behind the scenes of things. They're managers that have also held other positions in the past. But I was just like sitting there getting coffee and with a friend, and was able to meet Yuan Chun Bo, who is Feng Xiaozan's coach. Able to meet some other UFC staff at that time. At one point, we were hanging out, and Mahashate, the UFC lightweight, walks by, and my friend introduces me to him. Wang Cong walks by, get to say hello to her as well. So that was really cool. And there's the UFC event going on Saturday, so there's kind of 2 events worth of athletes just kind of buzzing around. That was really cool. Just being surrounded by the fighters and being able to say hey to people, and doing it from a position of media rather than just like being a fan where you're like kind of begging for their attention. It's like there's a much more seamless way for you to enter into conversations. So that was really, really fun. And I was able to just like have some longer conversations with people where I got to ask a lot of questions about like, why did this happen? What do you think about this? So that was really fun just to get to have some real longer conversations, because usually I just talk to people over messaging. There's a couple people that I do talk to on the phone, and we'll have sometimes longer conversations, but especially people that are nerdy about the same things that I am, which is Asian MMA, and a lot of things they know a lot more than me. It was really fun linking up with Yuan Chun Bo. He didn't speak any English. I was fighting for my life speaking Chinese with him, and we've messaged before actually quite a bit, but sometimes about Tapology kind of stuff. But he throughout the rest of the week was just sending me message after video of people to update from his gym. So that was really fun. I was really happy to get to do that. And then other people, I got to have lunch with Alex Bahunin. That was a really good time and really appreciated that. Some really great conversation. Got to kind of pick his brain about just working in the MMA media and ask him like, hey, like when you're in this kind of situation, what do you do? And I feel like it was one of the first times where I really got to sit down with like another media member, which I didn't realize this, but Alex Bahunin has only been in MMA media for like 4 or 5 years. I thought he had been in much longer, but he carries himself like he's been around for a decade. But so I see him as like as a longtime veteran. But yeah, so I got to, because there's no job training for someone in my position. You just plunge into it and you learn along the way. So it was good to get to have time with him. After the Road UFC event, I got to spend time with Carlos Legaspi, works for ESPN Deportes. And I didn't realize how many parallels there are between our 2 paths, which, by the way, I should mention, I kind of put him on like my A list of media members. He's probably like the guy for Mexican, Latino American MMA. that's why he works for ESPN Deportes. But there's a lot of parallels between our two paths. Both of us are not just in MMA, but we kind of focus on a geographic niche, like a broader geographic region. Both of us, like the Mexican region, now has their own PI and PI in academy. So does China. So there are some parallels there. Told me about a couple fights coming up that I was like, ooh, I didn't know about that. That sounds cool. But it was really good. We just hung out in the media room and we're basically like the last people to leave the Apex on Friday night. But that was really, really good to meet him. And, I got to meet a handful of other people that just walked up and said hello. I would have loved a lot more networking time, particularly at the like weigh-ins and the event. But the thing is, just like most people show up right when it's time to go, and then they leave once it's over. And there's just like these events are not built to be networking events, So there's a lot of people walking by me that it's like, hey, we know each other. Like we were hoping to connect this week, but we're both plugged into our work, so we didn't really get to do that. But it was really cool. I'm looking around this Apex, and there's all these Asian fighters. I look over and I see Rena Kubota from Japan, and I look over this way and I see Kim Tae-kyun and Viper from Black Combat, and just all these different people from my world that are all in one room. And it's like, who all these people are. Most of them know who I am. And that was also a weird thing, is like meeting people for the first time on whatever, UFC staff or whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, I know who you are. I'm like, you do? Like, that's so flattering and so fun. That was really cool. And people just expressing their appreciation. Hey, really appreciate what you do. Being at the Apex was cool. It was cool to, like, we see in videos, like, this is the press conference room, we're used to seeing that, and then weigh-ins, and then the cage area, and then kind of seeing the connecting tissue between all those places, knowing where they all are geographically, and the hallway of all the Ultimate Fighter shirts. Most of the building I didn't get to see just because I had to stay in this one little area. It was not a time to walk around and explore, but just being able to be there and kind of see like, oh, okay, this is like the broader media room where the press conferences are. That was cool. Watch it. It was interesting. I'm there Friday night. I'm set up. I'm watching these fights, having the time of my life, probably more invested than just about anybody in these fights. But I kept thinking, like, this Apex is like a great tool. It's a great resource. It's really handy to have. But I had to keep on thinking, like, why did we summon all of these athletes from Asia to this warehouse in Las Vegas to compete? Like, don't get me wrong. Yeah, they've got a lot of resources here. It's really easy. It's easy compared to anywhere else to pull things off. But like, it's just interesting, like, that we called up all these athletes and said, hey, come to this warehouse in this city in the desert in the United States, even though all of you, except for one, don't even live here. So that was like, it's really interesting to think about that. And, there's like 200 seats set up at the Apex. I tried to count them all, and it was somewhere around 200, but I was just like, if this is the most exciting sport on the earth, why are we having these in a warehouse in front of 200 people? As cool as this building is, like, this deserves to be in front of fans, even a small group of fans. Like, that was, I kept thinking about that, of like the location and place of just like, yeah, why are we doing this? And then 24 hours later, we're going to have a UFC event here. We're going to have some top middleweights here. This top prospect from China is making her debut. Why are we summoning them all to this warehouse when, like, there's nothing that says that we can't do this in front of fans. That was like a really strange thought that I like. It was like, even after being at the Apex, I was like, I don't know what the real answer for that is, other than like, I hate to say it, but maybe just a little bit of laziness of just like, well, it's easy to have the things here. But you really felt just like the silence after someone's name would be called, like after like Justin Bernard would announce someone's name, and then it's just like dead silence. You really felt just the like difference of a live event versus the Apex. So, people keep saying that the Apex is going to shut down for a while. They're going to expand it, which I heard that the Apex is going to be expanding, but it's going to be, everyone is saying like it's for more seating. But I've also heard that it's going to be for other like extreme sports properties. Like so that they can have other kinds of events there. I don't know if it seems like the perfect venue for Power Slap, but like WWE, things like that. It's always so interesting to me when Dana is asked about it and he's like, oh, well, I wouldn't know about that. And I'm like, dude, you're the CEO of the UFC. Like, how do you not know what's happening with your own building? I was confused by that, but yeah, so the Apex is expanding. Saw lots of construction equipment. There is tons of space. Like, I don't know if the UFC owns all of it, but they probably have used half of the total lot size between the PI and the Apex. They've probably used, maybe I'm over exaggerating, but they've probably used like half of that space. So I thought that was really interesting. At one point, I heard about a fighter hotel potentially being built. I don't know why that hasn't been built. But yeah, so Apex is definitely expanding. Hopefully, like I feel like there should be a minimum of like 1,500 seats in the Apex, and then sell your VIP like front row, comfy seat, cage side tickets for a lot of money. But I feel like the rest of that should be like, $100, $80. Like, you're not doing this to make a ton of money. Just get fans in there and just elevate the week. If you sell them for cheap like that, then you can sell it out every single time you have an event there, just with locals. But yeah, overall, great experience with the UFC staff. As far as the event goes and all that stuff, the weigh-ins were super fun. I really enjoyed that. Mostly just because I've never done anything like that before, with a live stream and a commentary. So I had to work out the tech. I had to like test it. I tested it here in Portland. I also tested it in my hotel in Las Vegas. All the tech. I also tried to work out a lot better systems to like cover things and not get too frantic. So I think that was a big win. Covering the event on Friday was super fun. I know people complained about all the decisions, but I think maybe I was just so invested that I didn't feel like many of the fights were very boring. Especially the first episode, the first half. I thought Yan Chi Hui versus Danny McCormick was an awesome fight. I thought Yusu Young versus Darmisi was really good. On God Bisht versus Choi, really great fight as well. I honestly felt like there was a lot of really good fights, even if there weren't a lot of finishes. And then Masuto Kawana versus Shiabin. Man, how do you not respect Masuto Kawana for just like, I mean, you can say he didn't fight with the best game plan, maybe, but I mean, the guy is just all action. Totally just the kind of guy. He's going to go out on a shield. Are there things he could have worked on with defense? Absolutely. But he brought such a tough fight to Shiabin, and for a wrestler, performed really, really well, and pushed such an insane pace on Xiaobin. Hit him with some pretty good punches, but Xiaobin is just way more technical on the feet and got just a nasty, nasty KO by left hook to cap things off for the evening. So, yeah, I had an absolute blast with coverage. I did like play-by-play results on my website. I did live tweeting. I did posts on Instagram. I guess just those three main things. But yeah, just I was like, even if I don't get all the content that I would really, really like to get out of being here in person, this is almost just kind of like a trial or test run, just to like, get into the apex, be able to meet different people, just kind of establish myself, since I'm a newer media to the scene. So it was a great time. I had the best time I've ever had in Vegas. I got to walk around the strip a lot. I got to sit by the pool and work, which was fun. I was mostly working. Like in the evenings, sometimes I would walk the strip, but otherwise I was working. I was prepared a lot of things that were kind of just like, in case this happens, I'll be ready. So I tried to be as prepared as I could for potential opportunities that would come. And I felt like I was able to like really enjoy the events and produce like some of my best work in terms of in-person coverage. So overall, it was a great time. Hotel sucked. But it was like funny, and it was bad in a funny way. My hotel halfway back home was bad in like a frustrating way. But I had some pretty good food. I had really good coffee. Went to a really good coffee shop that someone on Instagram recommended to me. What else? That's pretty much it. I mean, I'm going to try to set up some interviews with some of the winners from the event. But other than that, we got Macau coming up in November. The finals will be in Macau. We've also got Naim Jargal Tumendenbarrel versus Carlos Hernandez. We've got Lonar Kavanaugh against Jose Ochoa on that card. And I would expect that we'll probably get Song Yadong in the main event. If I had to guess who his opponent would be, I'd probably say Davison Figueiredo. But there's not a lot of options for Song in terms of like top 10. There's a couple outside the top 10, but I think most likely you'll see him in that main event. I got asked a lot if I was going to go to Macau, and I would say right now it's probably looking unlikely, since I just did this trip, and then Macau is 3 months from now. That's like a really expensive trip. I'd have to take time off of other jobs. I think it'd be more likely that I would try to make the opening round next year. But anything could happen. If someone just dropped, a couple grand on my doorstep for Macau, then that'd be great. But probably won't happen, which is fine. I will continue to give great coverage at a distance. I put these on here so I wouldn't forget, but some press passes from UFC, kind of cool. Got my picture on there. And then they gave me this at the weigh-in. So eventually those will go up on the wall with the other credentials as I'm putting things behind me here. But Wang Cong was pretty much fulfilling of every single thing that she should have done for her UFC debut. She looked amazing. She knocks out Victoria Leonardo with was it a left hook at about 62 seconds into round one. One hitter quitter. Honestly, to me, it felt like this was kind of a setup fight for Wang Cong. It felt like this was tailor-made for her to get a big knockout. Leonardo hadn't competed in a little bit, hasn't had a great run in the UFC, had a couple knockout losses. It felt to me like this is a setup for Wang Cong, kind of just to get her feet wet in the UFC. But amazing promos. She carries herself really, really well. Before the fight with the Joker face paint, she demanded to be on the main card at UFC Macau. Just it's like all the pieces of a star is what she has. Promos, pre-fight and post-fight. She's able to deliver excitement in the cage. She's got the backstory with Valentina Shevchenko. Everything is right there. So I would expect they'll definitely put her on that main card in UFC Macau. And to be honest, I think that they'll probably end up giving her kind of an Alex Peredo treatment. Maybe her next fight, I wouldn't be shocked if her next fight was against ranked competition. Put her against someone else that's kind of, maybe top 15, middling a little bit in the division, maybe like a Caitlin Sermonara. That could be an interesting fight. You could put her against, Montana De La Rosa, who's kind of sitting right outside, Lauren Murphy, someone like that. Lauren Murphy's been out. I don't know if that would happen, but you could do like a Luana Carolina, Veronica Hardy, Marina Moroz, a lot of fighters that are right outside that top 15. Flyweight honestly is very booked right now. I've got the only 3 fighters that are unbooked in the top, or 4 in the top 15 are Casey O'Neill, Caitlin Sermonara, Manon Fiorot, who's going to be the backup for Shevchenko Grasso 3, and Macy Barber. So I doubt they do Macy Barber. I could see them doing Sermonara. Probably not Casey O'Neill. I would think probably Caitlin Sermonara seems like a really interesting. We've seen a lot of these fights in the UFC that are just like random fighter from outside the top 15 fighting someone in the top 10. We saw one of these just today, or like, fighters taking really big jumps up. I saw today in the bantamweight division, it was Pedro Munoz got booked against Ayman Zahabi. So Munoz, he's not currently ranked, but he spent a long time being ranked. Zahabi is just kind of now like rising through the bantamweight division. We get these a lot. We had, I know these 2 guys are ranked, but Caio Borralho versus Jared Cannonier, another kind of one of those fights. Was it even just last year? What is it even just last year that they booked Abus Magomedov against Sean Strickland? They did Joe Pyfer against Jack Hermanson. So I could really see them doing that. I could see them doing Wang Cong jumping up against someone either right outside the top 15 or someone like Sermonara. Her track record so far has she hasn't shown any weaknesses in the cage. She's shown that she has the ability to knock out, to submit. She's shown that she has good takedown defense, and all the other components outside the cage are right there. So UFC, you'll get no complaint from me if you throw Wang Cong right into the mix and kind of fast track her to a UFC title shot, a la Alex Pereira. A lot of these kickboxers that have wins over notable UFC fighters seem to kind of get this treatment sometimes. So I would not be surprised. All right. There you have it. There's Wang Cong. Thought her performance was amazing. Let's also talk, before we get into your questions, let's talk about this Matrix Fight Night card on Saturday. Because I think this is a great card. I keep track of all my top, a couple dozen prospects from each country, and I would, and I kind of highlight them if they've got a fight booked. And about half of my Indian prospects are highlighted for Matrix Fight Night 15. India is such an interesting place because it is very right now today. It's very uncommon that we get like a really, really good prospect. Angad Bisht looked really good. I thought he over delivered against Choi Dong-hoon. I briefly saw someone asked about that, and I can get to that in a second. But I thought Angad Bish was very well prepared for Choi. And sorry, I'm just bringing this up here. And I do really like this card. Every time I say it, I'll try to find a way to watch it. I think I have a way now, so we'll see. But the main event is for the vacant bantamweight championship. It says featherweight, but it should say bantamweight. Chungrin Korin, he is the interim bantamweight champion, and he's fighting Kantaraj Agasa, who is a one championship vet and was supposed to fight at Road to UFC in this year, but he was working one championship. I think had locked him down, and he wasn't able to compete. A lot of fighters unhappy with one championship right now, but that's never new. So I think this is a tremendous fight. Chungrin Korin, I would say he was kind of in like the B tier of prospects up until fighting Muhammad Farhad. And he kind of passed that threshold, I think, into more, at least for where India is at right now, definitely a level prospect there. You do see that he's got a loss against Angad Bisht, but little less than 3 years ago, we know how good Angad Bisht is. Agasa is a great fighter in his own right. He has fought and won, and is a kind of a smasher kind of fighter. Really, really powerful guy. Really big for bantamweight, and hasn't competed in a little while. He hasn't fought and won since pretty much exactly 2 years ago. So this will be his first fight in a little while. He wasn't even scheduled for a one fight for look at that. He was just basically on the shelf for the rest of 2022, all of 2023, and to the beginning of this year. So that's really unfortunate. Wasted a lot of his prime with one. So this is a really good fight. Probably like the winner of this fight will be the best bantamweight in India. Probably your two best fighters right here. The former champion was a Pakistani guy named Ulumi Karim. And I think he's a free agent right now. As far as I know, he had to vacate the belt, which from what I heard, it was just hard to get him a fight in India because apparently it's really hard for Indians and Pakistani fighters to go to the other country, get a visa, and fight. Apparently relations are not that great between India and Pakistan. And obviously, I'm no expert on geopolitical politics of South Asia, but just from what Indian friends have told me is that it's really hard for athletes to cross over and compete in other countries, the other country. So from what I heard, it was just like hard to get Kareem into India to get a fight. So eventually the belt was vacated. Very interesting. So we have this interim belt. Very interesting. Two really good prospects, which their records wouldn't show it, but Rahul Thapa, he is a young guy that's coming up, and the theme of this Matrix Fight Night 15 card is, I would say, prospects that have been kind of at the B level that are good prospects, but this event will kind of solidify if they're ready to go into like A tier to like really be a strong prospect. So far, Rahul Thapa has looked good wrestling, good ground and pound and grappling. He's going to be fighting fan favorite Shyam Anand, who is just like, he's got a 4-2 record, but once you see who he's fought, it'll make a little bit more sense. His two losses are to the champion Sanjeet Budwar, who I would say outside of Angad Bisht is probably the best prospect out of India right now. And then he's fought Cage Warriors vet Richard Mearns, Mito Muhammad, a pretty solid win there, gave him his first loss. He's just like a destroyer kind of fighter. So because of that, he's got a pretty big fan base and his striking looks pretty good. And I think this will be a great test for Thapa. I think the winner of this fight could get a title shot next, especially if it's Thapa, but definitely pay attention to the winner of this fight because this is a really big matchup. You got Pawan Man Singh coming back at 205, fighting this guy Sandeep Kumar Dahiya. I think it's the fourth time they've fought, and Pawan Man is 2-0-1 against Sandeep. I'm not totally sure why this fight is happening again, but it is. I've heard a couple Indian fans tell me about this guy, Digambar Singh Rawat. He's only 3-0, fighting an 0-0 guy, so kind of too early to cash in on this guy for now. But I hear a lot of fans hyping him up. And then you've got these two 6-0 guys right here. I told you, kind of an event to see, like, are you ready to be like in that next tier of prospect? Both of these guys 6-0. They've got a couple decent wins between the two of them, but no one that I would really say is like a gatekeeper for the upper level. At least I'm talking in terms of where Indian prospects and Indian MMA is at right now. I'm not saying they're UFC ready. I'm not saying they're like some worldwide top prospect, but these are two kind of threshold fights. Govind Singh has fought at One Pride. He fought at a PFL. Is that right? He fought One Warrior Series, Matrix Fight Night. For some reason, I'm thinking of Vikas Raul Singh fought for PFL, but this guy at One Pride, he looked pretty good against Rama Supandi, a Road UFC veteran. So I think he's solid. I wouldn't put him in as like top of the food chain in terms of Indian prospects, but this guy Arshian Memon 6-0. This will be a really good test for him. If he can get by Govind Singh, it's like, okay, he's someone worth paying attention to in India. Then this kind of similar story for this guy, Mridul Saikia, fighting against Himanshu Kaushik. Kaushik has fought a lot of really tough guys. I think he's fought in karate combat. Yeah. Look at that. He's scheduled to fight Alumi Karim in karate combat. So he's fought for them. He's fought Angad Bisht. He's fought for one championship a couple times. Stafar Rahardian, Indonesian kind of trailblazer, and Dej Damron, kind of a Thai, I would say similar kind of trailblazer role. He fought several times for one championship. He's fought for MFN several times, karate combat. So this is a pretty tough guy, and good test for Mridul Saikia. Other than that, kind of guys trying to get their feet wet, higher level in terms of experience fight. And just the third one here, Mohammed Farhad, brave CF veteran right there. Daniel Damlong, I would say the only guy at middleweight that I've heard of from India right now. So, I've had, I'll keep my eye on him as well. Definitely one to watch. So there you go. There's Matrix Fight Night 15. That airs on Disney Hotstar, Disney Plus Hotstar, which is an Indian-only broadcast channel. The fights are usually on YouTube in the week or two to come. So keep an eye on that. I'll try again to see if I can work out VPN stuff and watch these freaking fights. But yeah, so it's not just the VPN. Sometimes you have to have a phone number, a local phone number, so it can be tough. But again, I'll try my best. Let's see what you guys have in terms of questions this week. So let's see. Yeah, starting off hot. Why is Marcel, who is respected, giving Crazy Kevin a platform? Kevin has shown that he spreads fake news and gets stuff wrong for clout. Even Jillian DeCourcy called him out. He is shown to be an untrustworthy clout, but Marcel is giving him a chance. I know you just block and move on, but it's this type of nonsense. Let me see if I can find out what you're talking about here. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you or someone else had asked this question before, right? I think the reason for that, I'm trying to see if there's a recent fight that he had reported. apparently there was a fight that this guy Kevin had reported, and from the best we could tell, he was the first to report it. But I think at that time, it doesn't. I mean, guys, understand it doesn't matter who it is. If they're the first one to report it, you're obligated to give them credit. You don't have to like it, but you do have to do that. So I think maybe that's what you're referring to. But yeah, by now I feel like MMA time moves so quickly. It's like dog years. Like 1 week is like a month. So it feels like weeks ago that happened. But yeah, you got to give people credit. That's all I got to say. Why is Contender Series nominated for Best MMA Program when it's a promotion, not a program? It's categorized the likes of Morning Combat and MMA Hour. Yeah, that doesn't really make sense to me either, right? I mean, I do feel like Contender Series is really well produced. The pre-fight packages are really well done. I feel like they give you everybody's story, which they really don't have to, because these fighters are at least half of them are not getting contracts usually. So it's a lot of investment in the storytelling that may not always pay off, but I do really appreciate it. And it's fairly fast paced. It's to the point, not a lot of frills to it. And it just feels like it's MMA content that's made for hardcore fans. And because of that, I really appreciate that. And so, and yeah, just everything with just putting on 5 fights between prospects and the Apex, it's really, really well done. So it's not that it doesn't deserve props, but that kind of category, yeah, it doesn't really. It's like, why does Contender Series get in there, but like Cage Warriors doesn't, or any other promotion that puts on fights? That seems like a big mistake to me. I'm not sure. So Shin Haraguchi losing was a surprise. Where does he go from here? He really needs another element to his game other than wrestling. I agree, and I feel like Shin. I felt like Shin. This is going to sound really harsh, but well, I'll give him credit. You can rely, if your wrestling is that good, you can rely on it for a while. You don't necessarily need to adapt if you're able to at a certain level. Just rely on your wrestling and keep winning, because like let me just pull up his record. Was he even finishing fights before Road to UFC? There were several finished fights there before Road to UFC. He had finished 4 of his 5 wins. And they're all by TKO. I'm guessing a lot of ground and pound. And then his first Road to UFC win, he won by ground and pound as well. So I think at a certain level, he was able to ground people and get the TKO finishes when the opponents had lower levels of grappling. And then once it moved up a little bit, he fights Park Jae-hyun. He fights Rongju Hong Jun-young, who has pretty good grappling. He fights Ju Kong-jie, who has pretty good wrestling defense. And a lot of those fighters too, especially Rongju, Ju Kong-jie, really like highly aggressive, offensive, damaging kind of guys. It gets, and I saw that he fought Naoyuki Kotani and Kim Sang-won. Not saying those guys don't have good grappling, but I think where they were at that time, whether because of old age, kind of being past their prime, or just developing, the grappling wasn't totally there. I don't know if something else changed with Shin Haraguchi, where he wasn't striking as much when he hit the ground or attempting as many submissions. But it has seemed like the last 4 fights, he has relied only on his wrestling. He'll throw a few strikes here and there, but he hasn't like it seems like just like wrestling over and over and over again. And there's also, it seems like there's an inability to keep people down. That's why he has to keep shooting, right? It's because fighters keep standing back up. So you reach these levels in your development where you've just hit a wall, and it's like you can go no further without some kind of reinvention. That's what Shin Haraguchi has run into. And Ju Kong-jie, I did score the fight for Ju Kong-jie because he was the guy that scored the meaningful damage. The fight against Shin and Hong Jun-yong, there just wasn't a whole lot of damage either way. So it went to Shin because he was so dominant with his wrestling. Same with Park Jae-hyun. That fight was, Park fought pretty well in that fight despite being a late replacement. So yeah, I mean, Shin Haraguchi, I feel like I can't imagine that that the UFC matchmakers are super excited to bring him back right away. If I'm just guessing, it seems like just what we know from matchmaking, contender series, who gets contracts, like Shin Haraguchi is not giving the UFC what they really want. I was surprised that they brought him back for season 3, to be honest. He's an immensely talented guy. He's always in incredible shape, very physical, so many positive characteristics, and really could break through with the right adjustments. He really could. It's not that I'm low on Shin Haraguchi. He's hit a wall that he desperately needs to reassess and change a lot of things, maybe get some different looks from some coaching. But he was upset that he lost the fight. I saw a lot of people upset that Shin Haraguchi lost the fight. But when you damage and attempt that little offense that really scores on the highest levels, you just can't be shocked if you lose a fight. When your opponent is landing even just a few damaging strikes. So I wasn't surprised at all. And I feel like the right guy got the W there. It is unfortunate. I was a little bit bummed that there are no Japanese fighters in the finals now, totally knocked out. I was honestly really hoping for Masuto Kawana to pull off the upset. I like Shabin a lot too. It's not that I'm anti him, but I think Kawana is definitely a guy that's going to get invited back just because he is so exciting, and his wrestling honestly is about at the level of Shin Haraguchi too. It's like near that Olympic level. So hopefully we get Masuto Kawana back. He's always been exciting in his 2 road to UFC fights, despite taking a lot of damage. But yeah, I'd love to see Shin Haraguchi just like take some time off. He's only 26 or so, 25, 26. He's 25 years old. Take some time off. Hit up your boys at Bong Tao MMA or Tiger Muay Thai, something like that. Take some time off. Just fight in some regional shows. Fight for like Road FC. Fight for I always say UAE Warriors. Fight for Brave. Like whoever. Go back to Gladiator in Japan. Anybody, Pancrase, Shudo, Deep, lots of options. But yeah, you definitely need to change some things up for sure. I would definitely advise against joining Road UFC in next year. I mean, what's the point? Just like if you want, take a lot of fights on the regional scene while you're working on things, get a win streak back underneath your feet. And yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of promotions that would love to give him a fight. At least I should hope so. So he has a lot of time, and I'm still really optimistic for his chances because he's obviously learned wrestling extremely well. He's an exceptional athlete, and he's still really young. So don't give up on the guy. So Slack said that if you're a minus 1,300 favorite like Wang Cong, maybe you don't deserve a bonus as a joke. Opinion on that joke? Why are people getting mad at him for that when he explained that on his pod, that he was super impressed and gave a detailed breakdown? Do people take X too seriously? Of course they do. And that was something that Alex Bahun and I were talking about on Friday. Was we were just like, sometimes people just need to step back and realize that all of this is a game, so don't take it too seriously. I don't think that kind of favorite, I don't think that plays into things at all. The thing is that the UFC is wanting to give fans an entertainment product, and odds or not, that kind of knockout adds a lot to the broadcast. It's highlight reels, it's excitement, and they want to reward fighters who bring the most excitement to the broadcast. That's why they give even losers of fight of the night a bonus as well. So she definitely deserved it. Also, the other guy, Myron Santos, who won the tough finale, he could have deserved a bonus as well. That was a pretty cool KO. So overall, yeah, a lot of really good performances on that card. But it's like, how does Wang Cong's KO not make it to the very top? Which, okay, this has nothing to do with that, but I was really interested to hear how the English broadcasters pronounced Wang Cong's name, and because there's a lot of ways I could go wrong. I think I heard them say Wang Thong, which was, I mean, it's hard. I'll admit it's hard. Chinese is hard. Not everyone can sit down and have a full phonetic class in all these languages before they do the broadcast, but that was rough. That was hard to hear. Wilder suddenly stands for Kevin Iole. He's still not good, and one defiant conversation doesn't mean anything. Like Ghost said, most likely contrived by the UFC. I think it's my interpretation of that situation. The situation, if you don't know what we're talking about, is go back and actually, I don't recommend it. I didn't even really watch much of it. I just watched a couple clips, but the media sparred with Dana White over John Jones being #1 pound for pound for a very long time at the Contender Series post-fight press conference this last Tuesday night. And one of those media members would be Kevin Iole, who's typically aligns with the perspective of Dana White, or a very pro UFC perspective, typically. But he made an exception this time and really pushed back on that. And I think the fan appreciation, if I'm interpreting things correctly, is a little bit of like an ironic appreciation. So I wouldn't take it too seriously. I think a lot of it is like kind of, I think it's a little bit of a joke. But props to Kevin. But in all seriousness, props for pushing back. I share opinions on both sides of the argument, typically because pound for pound, like we've said, is extremely hard to define. And so it's really hard, I think, to like firmly clamp down and be totally convinced of any one position when there's multiple definitions for pound. Either way, I give you props, Iole, for pushing back. But I think I wouldn't read too much into that. Is MMA a real sport? Saw on X that this guy is getting mad at people for not taking MMA discourse seriously. Again, all of this is a game. All of this is contrived for our entertainment. So it is a sport, but you should. What did I see? I think Caposa understands MMA, what MMA should be, more than anybody else, because someone asked him recently, how are you able to be in the sport for so long and still seem so passionate and be so consistent about it? And his answer was, as soon as I realized that MMA is a unserious sport, it's a sport, but there's a lot of unserious things about it, then it allowed me to hold it, appreciate it, hold it with an open hand a little bit better. And I really do think that that is the key to MMA. That's even the key to longevity in MMA is seeing that. I also saw today someone posted kind of like a clip from Pride as an appreciation. I think it was a on this date kind of thing. And maybe it was Caposa, maybe it was someone else that said like Pride, so few fans understand how good Pride was because it combined both the best, most elite fighters in MMA at the time. And I think the clip was from Fedor versus Crow Cop. Pride was both the most elite fighters in the world at the time, but also had some of the wackiest shit that you have ever seen. Just the dumbest stuff, but both of them were coexisting. And I think that really is unlocking the key to MMA. It doesn't mean that you can't feel passionate about it. It doesn't mean that you can't dig into the technicalities. It doesn't mean that you can't take parts of it seriously, but you have to realize that like it is an entertainment product at the end of the day. And because that is true, it's going to lead to a lot of wacky things. Things aren't always going to make sense to us. Every once in a while, you'll see freak show, circus things, way out of left field things. And that's just MMA and what it has always been. It's not even that the sport is changing, it's what it has always been. Literally, the sport started as like a freak show attraction. So it's always going to have part of that in its DNA. But I do think that in defining what a sport is, it still falls into that. Technically, it's just there's a lot of dancing bears juggling bowling pins at the same time. So I think you can make MMA whatever you want to make it, to be honest. The worst thing that can happen to a fighter to suffer a high profile early stoppage, since the next time the ref is going to let the same fighter get beaten half to death like Jared Cannonier. Is that the worst thing that can happen? No, I don't think that's the worst thing that can happen to a high profile fighter. I think the worst thing that could happen is taking a really bad knockout and never being the same, or going through a really difficult fight that you lose and you're never the same. For Carlos Condit, losing a close fight that he could have won against Robbie Lawler in, I think that was January of 2016. And then he never really looked the same from there. Even like Johnny Hendricks, I mean, the common denominator here is Robbie Lawler, but Johnny Hendricks fighting Robbie Lawler, and then just, I don't know if it was Lawler, if it was other things, but he just was never the same either. I think that's really the worst thing that can happen to you, is suffering a loss that you can't come back from. Jared Cannonier, I mean, the guy could move up to light heavyweight or heavyweight. I know he used to fight at those weight classes, but he could move up in weight and totally reinvent himself and immediately be near the top of the division. He could still have a lot of life left in his career. So for him, like he could still have additional chapters, but I think when you have that loss that not only alters your physicality but also your mind, which is part of your physicality, but I think that's probably the worst thing that could happen. One person said that MMA is not a real sport because of how easy to access the sport and its top competitors are. I mean, well, with that kind of logic, then middle school gymnastics is not a sport as well. Anyone go to a gym and train at the top level competitor at the UFC. That's something you can't do at the NFL or NBA. The conversation about MMA being a real sport is a bit tongue in cheek. It really is, but there is a massive gap standards compared to other pro sports. And really, that is just because of the architecture of MMA, and the on ramps of MMA is different from other sports. If MMA was practiced and really popularized at the youth level and college level, if it had that same infrastructure to lead up to the professional leagues, then probably it would be similar. There would be like pro level gyms, and then there would be just such a separation, you know. But I would say that's one of the really big advantages of MMA as a sport is the accessibility to its athletes, high level athletes. Definitely, I think that's a big thing. What's my opinion of middleweight as a whole? Kaio emerging brings a lot of interesting matchups. If he didn't win, it would have been rematches in the top 10. I think middleweight is a pretty, crazy to say, but a pretty healthy division right now. It has been criticized. It was stale for a while, but perhaps this was in part due to the UFC matchmakers, but I think that they've really revived the division. Think about this. You've got a pretty decent rematch waiting in the wings if they want to do Duplessis versus Adesanya. They've got a pretty interesting number one contender fight in Whitaker and Chimaev coming up. So you've got the top of the division mapped out. You've also got Nasruddin Imavov, you've got Brendan Allen, you've got Caio Borralho. Not to mention all the other like perennial contenders that are kind of sitting around there. You've got Cannonier, Vittori, you've got Hermanson, Costa that are still kind of hanging around. And then coming up, you've got Anthony Hernandez, you've got Michel Pereira. I don't know how high their ceiling is, but you know, and so that at least gives the division a couple years. And then there's a couple prospects that are coming up. Not a lot that I would say I'm like super excited about, but you know, you've got Bo Nickel, you've got Joe Pyfer. There's a handful of fighters that you can find at middleweight that might be there in a couple years. So I think middleweight's great. Honestly, the last middleweight title fight was really exciting. The Duplessis Strickland fight was pretty interesting. Duplessis as a whole as a champion, like you may be able to criticize parts of his game, but he's a very interesting champion for a lot of reasons. Very unique style. So I think it's fun. I think middleweight's a lot of fun. No complaints there. And it's just one of the many weight classes. So I would honestly, if you're like ranking the health of divisions, I would rank middleweight closer to the top. Every single division in the UFC is going to have its peaks and valleys. That's just normal. Champion becomes dominant. The division's kind of wiped clean a little bit. Then they lose the belt. All of a sudden, things are fresh again. That's what's happened at middleweight. The whole thing has just been put in a jar and shaken up once Adesanya left and Alex Pereira went up in weight. And we could even see Pereira come back down up to middleweight again. Who knows? I think it's a really fun division. All right. How did Alex Behunin become a good standard for MMA media, even though he hasn't been in the sport for too long? Can you share? There are S-Lords who have been covering MMA for a long time and are still bad at it. So, yeah, I was asking Alex about that. And I think that he is one of those people that from day one carried himself in a very professional manner. And I think when you do that, you're already above a lot of the crowd there. He was working for Cage Sided Press and then for MMA Mania. And then what he told me was that he was living in Southern California for a while. He only moved to Vegas like two-ish years ago. He was living in Southern California, and he was driving to the UFC to Las Vegas. He said like once, like all the time, like once a month. He's like, I wasn't getting paid much for it. I wasn't making that money back. All of that was an investment. So I basically just ate shit for a couple years and just like, you know, did whatever I could, took whatever opportunity. So then he said that this opportunity came up for a full-time position. I don't know what happened. I think he eventually just moved to Vegas, and then this full-time position came to him. And now he just, you know, he goes to every single UFC event in Vegas, goes to every single Contender Series event, every Apex event, every T-Mobile show. So he just like, and sometimes travels as well, but just like, he has just become one of the just consistent Las Vegas media members. And I think when you have the, like, it was a big deal for me to go to the Apex once to cover a Road to UFC event. He does this every week, if not multiple times a week. Like last week, he was at 3 different shows. He was at Road to UFC, he was at the Fight Night card, and then he was at Contender Series. It's just like his office, you know? So he's gotten to know people. He's been around a lot of other really professional people. And so I think just his willingness to, you know, make those 4 or 5 hour drives from California to Vegas over and over and over again. Like, it doesn't, not everyone's sacrifices and investments always pay off, but for him, his hard work and investments, he also got the opportunity for a full-time media position, which you could really do. I mean, for him, like, yeah, he does get a full-time, going to all these UFC events and just doing the even basic interviews, post-fight press conferences, social media. Like, that's a full-time job. And it's also really, really valuable for any publication to have someone in Vegas that can give on the ground coverage at literally every event. So I think he's partially in the right place at the right time, but also hard work, investment, and committing to a professional standard from the beginning. So for sure. Did I see On God Bish versus Choi? Yes, I did. I was cage side for the fight, and it's on my agenda to watch back all the Road to UFC fights to be able to listen to the commentary, see what else I can learn from it, and see if I see any of the fights differently. From my vantage point, which really was a pretty good vantage point, there's a lot of controversy about this fight, but I scored the fight for Choi. I felt like they chose the right winner here. And there was a lot of folks that scored it for Bisht, especially from the Indian community. But, and I'll reiterate what I said earlier. I thought that On God Bisht carried himself like a UFC fighter. I thought he looked amazing. He showed a lot of really good growth. He was able to push a good pace. His striking looked better than it has in the past. He was able to land a lot of heavy punches. But I do think that Choi had a couple knockdowns. And so I think the most damaging, most effective strike still went to the way of Choi. I scored round 1 for Bisht and the next 2 rounds for Choi. The first round was really close, and there wasn't a whole lot of like really meaningful strikes either way. But I felt like Bish, like when they were just like trading in the pocket or at ranged, I felt like Bish strikes were harder. But overall, the grappling went back and forth. That was really fun. But I felt like Choi, the third round was definitely a Choi round. The second round I gave to Choi because I felt like the calf kicks were really strong, and then he got a knockdown. I believe I'm looking down. I'm looking over my own summaries. of these rounds, the play-by-play that I did. So I'll have to watch it again. Maybe I'll change my mind when I watch it again. Either way, On God Bisht, I think should be one of the. I was like, if he gets into Road UFC season 4, which he should, he will be one of the favorites to win it. If I were to seed him, I would put him as like a number 1 or number 2 seed for sure. And honestly, I could see the UFC making an exception and just signing the guy, if not like if he fights one more time between now and next season, I could also see the UFC just signing him because he looked good. He was exciting. He's got a massive, massive following, and he's right at the beginning of his prime. So I actually think that On God Bish, you could even see him make the UFC. They signed Puja Tomar. So like skill for skill, like I feel like On God Bisht, like he's at that same level, if not a little bit better. So it was a great fight. I thought both guys looked really good. So yeah, nothing to be ashamed of. You mentioned Wang Cong. Can I send you a breakdown, Ghosted, of the principle that Cong did by attacking weight transitions? Absolutely. Yeah. Would love that. Thank you. Do you know Miguel Class? Briefly, or like barely. He mentioned that if anybody above 170 learned to pivot, they would change the game. That comment was met with not smart fans saying that pivots don't work in MMA. Why do fans like low-level MMA? Why don't they like to educate themselves? Because it is a patient work, because it takes time, and most fans are not down for the patient work, is what I would say. Yeah, not everyone can be a hardcore fan. Everyone can make an ass of themselves on Twitter. So there you go. What is your opinion on Aljo saying that O'Malley was stacking the deck so he can get these highlights? Aljo took the fight and got KO'd. That's not stacking the deck, isn't it? So the assertion that he was basically taking easy fights, well, he may have just been above his. He may have just been above. I mean, it's not like he gets to pick the fights, And he also has a couple fights that went to decisions too. Fought Thomas Almeida. At the time, Thomas Almeida was a huge prospect from Brazil. Fought Marlon Vera, the first time, and lost that fight. Fought Eddie Wineland in just his second UFC fight. Eddie Wineland, long-time vet, not an easy fight for anyone making their UFC debut. He fought Chris Moutinho. I think that was on short notice. Fought Raulian Paiva, who is pretty good. I think he was ranked at one point. No contest against Pedro Munoz. And then fought Piotr Jan. So it's kind of hard to say that. I mean, like, I think the biggest criticism that people have against Sean O'Malley was that the matchmakers rushed him into a title fight because he had only fought, he hadn't fought a whole lot of the top contenders at bantamweight. So if there's a criticism, then it's that. But I mean, he still won the belt. So, and he knocked Aljamain Sterling out. He had a pretty kind of cruise to a win over Marlon Vera. So it really it's kind of hard to see where that argument comes from. It also, I mean, Sterling should know he doesn't. I guess you can cherry pick a little bit with the fights that the UFC offers to you, but I mean, you can only do that so much, and especially when you're coming up. I mean, he only really fought like 2 ranked fighters before a title fight. So if you're going to get mad, then get mad at the UFC matchmakers for sure. Let's talk Jack Slack. Is the jokes and valid critique he has of UFC cynicism, or is it a new way to look at the sport? I find his posts entertaining and funny, but often misinterpreted as bad. Yeah, I think we've talked about that and talked about him a good bit on here. I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, overall, he's entertaining people with his humor. He's entertaining people with his technical knowledge as well. it's not like that attitude isn't really for me, but it is entertaining for a lot of people. So it's very cynical. It's definitely very cynical. I don't know how you couldn't argue that it's not cynical. There's occasions where cynicism is necessary, or I think it borderlines on critique. So critique and cynicism are very often the same thing. But you know, I sometimes watch them for the technical stuff, but I don't really stay for a lot of the cynical kind of stuff. So it's all what your flavor is, what your preference is. To reiterate the Kevin stuff, the reason is that Kevin said that Oliveira versus Volk is on for 309. This happened yesterday, and rightfully so. People called him out on it. I'm saying that he's untrustworthy and should be canceled since he keeps making the same mistake over and over again. It's like when you broke the song Fight News, but you were generally sorry and didn't repeat your mistake. But Crazy Kevin keeps doing this to get clout. It sounds like he is getting canceled, right? Let me see that. Let me look it up and see what you're talking about here. Islam versus Volk. I didn't see it, so there you go. That didn't even touch my timeline. With all the people that I follow, it may not even show up on my timeline now because I've got different things muted. So I don't even see that on my timeline at all. So I must have it all muted, and that, maybe to your point, is what's happening. So yeah, so honestly, that fight wouldn't shock me if it happened. Here's what I think some people do sometimes. I think that sometimes people, and who is the other guy? Real Ruben was the other guy I saw do this. I think that sometimes people will just like fantasy matchmake and then say these fights are confirmed. So that way, if those fights end up actually happening, then they get the credit for it. You know, I think that I feel like that definitely has to happen. I also feel like there's a lot of wonky things that happen with MMA reporting. I think that's one of them, is people will just like guess at fights and then hope that they happen so that people will follow them. And in the meantime, they'll get tweets, retweets, all that stuff. I think also what happens is people make a lot of deductions about the UFC roster website. So you can go on the UFC site and look at their athletes, and you'll see fighters that are added on there. And I check that pretty often. And other people I know probably check it way more often than me. And I think that people look at that and make way too many assumptions. It's usually true that the UFC is doing something with this fighter, but I've seen people that will automatically deduce like, oh, these two fighters just got added to the roster. They're probably fighting each other at Contender Series, or this fighter got added, so he's going to be fighting in Road UFC. I've even seen people post, like after the UFC will add like 10 fighters to the roster, I'll see people post like, per sources, these fighters will be fighting on Contender Series, when literally the source is just the UFC website. So there's a lot of weird things going on. And I've posted, like, when that happens and I notice it and I feel like I want to post about it, I'll just say like, these fighters were added to the roster. But like Kosa Kyun, like there's Asian fighters that are fighting on Contender Series that people thought would fight on Road to UFC because they're Asian. And it's like, you really can't make these kind of assumptions unless you actually know it from the source. You can point out that they're added. You can point out that the UFC's, probably going to do something with them, but you can't make fight announcements until you actually hear it from the sources. So I see a lot of like halfway or not even that much MMA reporting going on. And I think you just have to be honest with what you're seeing and you're fine. But a lot of people I think they'll like put together pieces, try to put their own pieces together and turn that into reporting. And that's just not how reporting goes. Those are observations. That's not reporting. So very interesting. What do you think of this quote from Sun Tzu? Victorious warriors win first, then go to war, while the defeated go to war first, then seek to win. Good, bad, not relevant in life or MMA. So yeah, I mean, just like with any kind of proverb, a proverb is not there to give you a formula. A proverb is there to tell you how life generally goes. Trying to think of a proverb. I know a lot of them, but okay, so let's just use this one for example. It's talking about people that have a perspective of victory, that can visualize victory before they go to battle, or that they carry themselves like a winner. We obviously know in MMA that that's not always true, but a proverb is there to tell you how life usually goes. I think the message is how you prepare and expect to win. People that we have seen this in MMA. There are people that fight in this sport that their self-belief is so high and that they don't ever consider losing as any possible option. And that by some intangible force carries them a long ways in the sport. It could carry them to a win. When it gets to be round 4, round 5, it could push them through to a late finish or to win the last couple rounds. Self-belief is, I think, one of the most impressive, not always admirable, but impressive parts of fighters. And so I think if I'm interpreting that correctly, I think that's what that proverb is about. Rather than like it's saying, showing up and then trying to figure out how to win. It's about your self-belief. It's about your preparation, how you anticipate that you'll win, being able to visualize the win. So I think that in general, that is true. True as a principle, not a formula, for sure. Do I actually consider Lupi Godinez as a world-class fighter? On Cagecraft podcast that Ghost guested on, he broke down Lupi's tendencies and how that would play into Dern's natural striking. He didn't get the hype around Lupi, and I hate Mackenzie Dern for the excuses that she's given after each loss and overly praised after each win. Can you explain the hype around Lupi? I don't know if from my perspective, she's not come off as a fighter that has like a lot of hype. There was a little bit of, so with Lupi, I think where she kind of made a name for herself was her activity. And what was it? Was it, looking at her record right now. In 2023, she fought 4 times, which is a lot. And she went 4-0 in 2023. That in and of itself is going to get you noticed. And she didn't fight scrubs. She fought Cynthia Calvillo. She fought Emily Ducote, Elise Reed, and Tabitha Ricci. Not fighters that are like at the top of the division, but not easy fights either. All of those have their own degree of challenge to them. So I think because of just that strength of schedule. Since she's fought in the UFC, she came in 2021. She fought, let's see, 4 times in 2021, twice in 2022, 4 times in 2023. And then she really took a big step up this year. She's 0-2 this year, but she fought Mackenzie Dern and Vina Jandiroba, which just by rankings, those are her 2 toughest fights. But I think that her reputation is that she is really active, had a really strong 2023, has decent wrestling, and is, just an overall like gritty, tough fighter. I think that's really what embodies her, and she's kind of made her name of. I don't know if, like, I haven't really encountered a whole lot of people that were like, Lupe Godinez for the belt in 2025. I didn't hear a lot of that, but I think it was more of just a respect for her game of just being an overall tough challenge. So I think that's mostly what she kind of represents in MMA right now. Shiming defeated Dong Huaxiong. There were people in Chinese MMA that were convinced that Huaxiong was the next Zhang Weili. Can we put that to bed now? She's good, but doesn't have that it factor. I've gone back and forth on this too. I think there's been moments where she's looked really good. And there were moments when it seemed like her own self-belief was going to like push her through. But I think since she's come back from her long time off, she just has not always been able to pull the trigger. I still believe that if she was able to find that next gear of aggression, then I think that she could, like, at the very least, punch her way into the UFC. Still really young, has a lot of good potential, but I don't know if it's a mental thing or what, but she just has not been able to really just like lock into that next gear. She was a little better last Friday against Shiming than she was against Priya Sharma, but just didn't. I wasn't sure. Let me see actually who I scored for the fight. I think I scored the fight for Dong, but again, I could be convinced a different way if I watched it again. It was super, super close, hard to score. I still felt like Dong Huaxiong was not pushing as hard as she could have and as much as she should have. So until I can see her click into that level, I don't think that she's going to be able to really push herself into the UFC. But that was a really interesting fight. And I think Shiming she's gone from like kind of plateauing wrestle-based prospect to like really like pushing herself to the next level. I'm trying to get an interview with her as well, just because I want to talk about like, who's this new coach you have? Like what's different about your training now? Because she's aggressive. She's showed some really good things with her striking, and overall just like a wonderful personality and really a fun presence to have in the UFC cage. So I really have to credit both Shiming and her coach for the work they've done, because it seemed like she really is evolving into the next level for sure. Slack said on his podcast that Song looked like a sharp striker, and that was probably the best KO on the card. It's weird that people get mad at him so quickly. Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that was like the standout single performance, and especially the standout finish of the night. It's pronounced Wang Cong. That's funny. Hey, Chris, will we ever see Angad Bish compete in the UFC again? His fight with Choi is pretty close. Yeah, I covered that a little bit ago, but yeah, I do think we will. I do. Does Kevin Iole stand among the face of independent MMA journalism, fighting for truth, justice, and the integrity of the pound for pound list? Snarky meaning that I'm being sarcastic in a mocking way, snarky, healthy in everyday life, or just obnoxious, should be safe for the internet. Well, you've heard it. I don't know if you've heard of the term scarcasm. I think that even sarcasm should have its limits. So I try to keep a leash on it for sure. I try for it to always be in like a fun. I feel like as soon as sarcasm is like going after somebody, for me personally, that crosses a line that I have, but can't control other people. To build on my question about MMA being a real sport, how do we close that gap to become a professional sport? To mega gyms that promote MMA, help that? I think one way that MMA can grow is by popularizing youth competition, youth and amateur competition. I think if that becomes more lucrative and bigger, then that will help MMA to flesh out more the on-ramp. I do think that this is growing with some of the like amateur MMA competitions around the world, MMA games and Gamma, IMMA, F, things like that. So I think it is getting there, but who is it? CC Legospi was telling me about a 13-year-old fighter that was like making waves. What? It was some Latin American country. Forget which one it was. Colombia, maybe even Mexico. But he was talking about a 13-year-old, and I was like, I haven't heard about many 13-year-olds, so I wonder if that really grew there, where there was a safe place for youth and really young adults to compete at an amateur level, where it was like cool, like, okay, picture this. Imagine think about all the ways that like karate and jujitsu, and you could even throw slap fighting in there. But think about these different, now that I threw slap in there, these different combat activities, I'll say, if we're not talking about slap, just like these different combat sports, sometimes someone will get a hand on them and just turn them into something really cool and make a really cool product out of them. I wonder if there was like an all amateur version of the LFA that just made a really, really cool product. Sort of is like just like this is somewhere where, and maybe they even have like a youth division. I don't know if that would sell, but if you had someone really smart behind it, because like most amateurs don't get paid. So like, honestly, it could be a pretty cost effective, like you could put most of your funds into, production, that kind of thing. I wonder then if you would see even more younger people wanting to get into MMA, because if you're like a young basketball player, shoot, like where I come from in Kansas, the guy that invented basketball kind of like birthed it from the city that I come from, Lawrence, Kansas, where the University of Kansas is at. James Naismith is the guy. It's like we've got the original rules of basketball there. There's a hall in his honor, Naismith Hall, like, and it's still one of the top schools in the country for basketball even today. So like a lot of young high schoolers really want to go to KU to play basketball. I mean, ultimately their dream is the NBA, but there is a place before the big leagues where they can really be like developed and get to entertain people, play the sport that they love, position themselves really well to be picked up by the NBA. So if there was something like that, it's like LFA has said that they want to be like the NCAA of MMA, and they kind of are, but like, is there an apparatus that could exist where that could be like popularized? I really think that for that to happen, there really has to be packaged and produced in a way that's really going to draw people in. So far, I haven't seen anything like that. I see that kind of stuff with like Craig Jones Invitational. I see that stuff with Karate Combat. So I don't know. I think that there's a lot of room to explore there. And I wonder if at some point, one of these rich people that owns, or like someone that a Dave Feldman or the guy that owns Karate Combat, I forget his name, but if they just were like, shoot, I'm going to get into amateur MMA and I'm going to make something really, really cool. I'm going to get all the best, even if it just kind of started as just like a US only thing, people that live in the US gathering all the best amateur prospects. We're putting them in a tournament. We're doing the season thing, and we're going to package it to be something that's really cool. We're going to build our own MMA facility, like the Apex, but way cooler. And we're going to have all of our events here. I don't know. There's the possibilities are endless, but yeah, great question. More of a comment, but I won $400 betting on Fionn Davis finishing Dern because I didn't inside information on Dern's camp where they said that her grappling is washed because she only focuses on striking and wrestling. She barely does jiu-jitsu anymore. Props to you. Congrats. Hope you took yourself out to a nice dinner or are going on a vacation, or most likely just betting it on the next thing. But either way, congrats. Well done. We often talk about fan bases, but what do you think about independent analysts getting large platforms and having a low educated fan base? It's weird that some analysts have more diehard fans than fighters. And that goes back to just, MMA is it's an entertainment sport. Really, every sport is an entertainment sport, but we're here to be entertained. So we're following whoever can entertain us best. It doesn't even matter if they fight or not. It matters what they give us. So, but yeah, I mean, independent analysts getting large platforms, loyal, educated fan base. It's great. Everyone wins. Honestly, it invests people more in the sport and it provides a living for people. And yeah, I think it's great. Would love to be one of those people. Thoughts on Hassan getting a title fight, and Echo Ronnie looks like he's fed up with one. I've seen that. Yeah, Bilal Hassan is an Indonesian guy, but he lives here in the States. Really young guy. And I think right now he's 4-0 and maybe 5-0. He's getting a title fight with CFFC on September 27th against a guy named Harris Bonfiglio, who I think is 7-1. So a lot of Indonesian fans are starting to come onto this guy, Bilal Hassan, because he also is really good at finishing. So has some really spectacular finishes. So he looks like a pretty good overall prospect, but could be a really, honestly, if he gets the CFFC title shot, I don't see how UFC doesn't swarm this guy for Road to UFC next year. He's absolutely the kind of guy that you could bring the Indonesian fans back to pay attention to Road to UFC. If he wins, the perfect guy to put on a Jakarta event, he is really an exceptional talent. So we'll see how he does against another step up in competition. He fought Shamar Finley at CFFC back in June, won that fight. So I like what I see out of Bilal Hassan. Seems like a pretty cool fighter. Eko Roni Saputra is one of many, many fighters that is fed up with one championship, having a hard time getting a fight. I think that he just like straight up took a fight with this other promotion, Baku Hatra. Is that what they're called? I thought that he had already just left one and taken a fight, but apparently he's still under contract with them. So that's really interesting. Actually, have we added this fight to Tapology? I had questions about, is this fight an exhibition or not? The fight in that he had in June with this Indonesian promotion is still not registered. So I'm starting to wonder, maybe that was an exhibition or something. I don't know. Different rule set. I thought it was an MMA rule set, but maybe there's some exceptions. Very interesting that he just took a fight despite being under one contract. But it sounds like he's fed up. He posted on Instagram recently that he asked everyone, like, what do you guys think? Should I stay or should I go? Which, of course, I'm like, dude, get the heck out of there. Run as far away from that organization as you can. Let me show you exactly what he said. I think he actually posted two things. Oh, whoops, that's awkward. Okay, well, never mind. I'll read the post to you. He said, "Stay or leave. Please write your comments below." And a lot of people are saying, everyone's saying leave. That's funny. And then today he posted, what did he say? This is a translation. "Thank you, friends, for your input. Lots of consideration and time keeps ticking. I do not want to waste time for nothing." Read between the lines there. "Give me time and I'll be back in the cage. Even better, hopefully can give a better life for the family." Doesn't sound like he is getting what he wants out of one championship. He's trying to be cordial about it, but sounds like he's struggling being with that organization. I don't know who this is, but, you know, this is my roommate. It's my roommate. Wash the dishes. Just kidding. Lighthearted question. Do you like Yu-Gi-Oh when you were a kid? Did you know the term Shadow Realm in MMA comes from Yu-Gi-Oh censoring death? That's funny. No, I didn't actually. And I wasn't really into Yu-Gi-Oh. I was into Pokemon. I was really into Digimon, like grossly into Digimon. So I was into my own anime kind of shows, but I never really got into Yu-Gi-Oh. I think maybe because I was already like so obsessed with Digimon and like pretty obsessed with a lot of Pokemon as well, that I just didn't have like, I don't know. I just never got into Yu-Gi-Oh, I guess. But yeah, that's really interesting. Is analysis patient work though? Yeah, it is. I pay for Ghost Substack and he gets digestible breakdowns minutes after a fight is fought. True, but you still have to, like, earning that kind of expertise takes patience. To be like, you have to be able to, like, if you're a really good coach or a great analyst, then you can just pop off. That's why they always like call Dean Thomas up on the UFC broadcast and he gives analysis, because he's like, he knows exactly what he's looking at, but having obviously that kind of expertise takes a lot of patience and work. But even as a fan, to be able to digest it, you still have to slow things down to even know what you're looking at and be able to appreciate it. Even a more digestible way of it is still patient, you know. Cinch the breakdown. Thanks. We'll look at that. Tagged you on another post. Was still not to accept the apology since he makes the same mistake a lot of times. No, I mean, I'm totally with you. I don't disagree about that. Find it odd that there are a lot of people saying being factually wrong is part of the game. if Nolan King or John Morgan did this, they would get in trouble and called out. Yeah, but I do think that there would be a lot of people willing to let them like take a strike. Like if one of them messed up, most people would like, I mean, yeah, if Dana White would look at that and be like, this is why the media is terrible. Like some people would take that perspective, but people that really know, I don't think would care too much because they know that they know their track record. Substack article is free. Nice. Listen to a podcast called Kick Weekly from Tim Wheaton. He's a really positive voice in MMA and kickboxing. Do we need more of that in MMA media? Yes, we do. We do need more positive people, not uncritical voices, but I feel like I want MMA to be fun. I want following the sport to be fun again. And I think that one of the best ways to do that is to be positive and to open the space for lots of different kind of people to enjoy the sport in different ways and creating positive connections for people instead of making like every single time someone says something stupid or like tries to learn about the sport and then they just get shut down, they get ridiculed, then MMA isn't fun anymore. When everything is the exact same, when it's sterile, it's not fun. But that's what I would love. Like there's parts of MMA that I feel like are really fun and some are really boring. And I wish that all of it was fun. So I think that being positive is fun for sure. Is Substack the future of social media? It's definitely growing. It's more personal and less toxic because it's best writers and content creators. Links work straight to your personal email inbox, like a newsletter, but personal. It's true. I'm considering that more and more. I do think that there's a move from everything apps to much more personalized, specialized work. Everything apps are Instagram, Twitter, X, Facebook. YouTube is still more in that direction, but I think that there is like an appetite quickly growing for, as weird as it is, like just longer, more in-depth kind of content. And even if your audience is smaller, it's monetized in a different way. So I do think that it is the future of social media. I think the future of social media is more Substack and Patreon kind of stuff. I think that YouTube is not going anywhere. I think that YouTube is still like growing, killing it, and a really good place for creators to be. I am really interested in something called the Fediverse. Have you guys heard of this? It's so Threads, right? Threads is a text-based app that is it's the goal is that it plugs into like a decentralized system so that in the same way that email, you can send emails between people of different servers. In the same way, the vision is that people that are on Threads can also see posts from people from like Blue Sky, which is another text-based app that I think is also growing pretty quickly. So there's different like platforms that you can have, but you'll see all of the posts together. So it's a decentralized thing. They're calling it the Fediverse. I'm watching it. I'm not totally set on it, but I wonder if like that kind of thing could keep growing. And I definitely don't feel like Twitter X under Elon Musk is like it's not gonna bounce back. I don't think it's gonna bounce back. Instagram is, from the numbers I see, kind of plateauing, it just changes too much, and there's so much turnover of people that use it. I think that, and it's so big that it's kind of hard to like really commit fully to that platform. TikTok, I'm not sure on. Facebook has been very come and go sort of. So that's kind of what I feel in the future of social media. It's going to be here to stay. I also wonder if we're going to reach a point when social media as a whole, there's going to be a lot of people that there's always been people that leave social media, but I wonder if we're going to reach a point in our culture where a lot of people are just going to like walk away from social media because it just has become too much. And there's going to be kind of a breaking point. And, probably in like the youngest generations, they're going to walk away. It's not going to be a part of their lives anymore. I wonder if we're going to reach something like that too. Not guaranteed, but I do think about that. Yo, Chris, just got here, so disregard if you just spoke about it yet, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on Park Sawan. Yeah, was super high on him, but we kind of forgot about him after the injury he sustained. He's fighting this weekend. Yeah, he is. Would he be a candidate for Road UFC if they do a lightweight tournament eventually? Yeah, and that's another thing I didn't, I used to run through the whole Asian MMA calendar, which I don't really do that anymore because I don't know if everyone's always interested in hearing about every single little thing. But Road FC does have an event this Saturday, and Park Sawan is in there. He is fighting Shutaro Dabana. You've also got on this card Yang Ji-yong, who's a bantam featherweight fighter, pretty decent prospect as well. I believe Shin Haraguchi's brother, Akira Haraguchi, is on there, fighting a 10-0 Kyrgyz guy. That's nuts. Park Sawan, yeah, he had a period of inactivity, 6-0 fighter, but still undefeated. And I think this will be his toughest test this weekend. I feel like he's been at the top of a lot of people's lists, but I think definitely he would be a fighter to be looked at for Road UFC next year. The question is he going to be locked in a Road FC contract? Road FC contracts sometimes are pretty long-term, and so they tend to like really lock people down. And Park Sawan has been with them for a long time. His first fight with them was over 4 years ago. So that would be my biggest question and why I didn't really consider him in the past for Road UFC. So we'll watch that. If he wins this, he's in a tournament right now, which I'm not totally sure which round of the tournament we're in right now. I think it's the semis. Quarterfinals. So that's another thing to look at as well. He still has 2 more rounds of this tournament to fight. Probably, I'd guess they do the next round in December or November. It's a long tournament. So he may miss Road to UFC next year. But if he wins both rounds and he's out by like February, March, maybe. I'd love to have you give one lock for a fighter to be on Road to UFC next season. Who would it be? I'd say Sanjeet Boudoir. I think that is a really, really good choice. Sanjeet is probably the number 1 Indian prospect outside the UFC. Although Angad Bisht may have taken that spot with his good performance against Choi last weekend. But Sanjeet is a good prospect. And now he is with First Round Management. He just signed a contract in the last month with First Round Management. So you got to think that's a big step in the direction of going somewhere like Road to UFC. I would say him. Let me see here. I've got a couple others as well. I think Agulali, Agulali is going to fight a 5-0 Kazakh at WLF 76 on September 20th. I did post that yesterday. Okay. Well, I keep a list of like fighters that are, I would say Sanjit Boudoir would be number one. Angad Bisht, 100%. Agulali, unless he something happens, I would say probably him too. And that's actually what he told me too. I asked him if he was going to be on Road to UFC, and he said, "Not this year, hoping for next year." So, also, Kantaraj Agasa, if he wins this MFN belt, I know he wants to be in Road to UFC next year. So a lot of Indian fighters. We could have a strong season for Indian fighters. And Agasa, Clinton de Cruz, I saw you mention that he's pretty good. I'm not like don't have all my chips in on Clinton de Cruz just yet, but between him, Kantaraj Agasa, Angad Bisht, and Sanjit Boudoir, we may actually have a year where we actually get all the top Indian prospects in Road to UFC. So that could be really fun and interesting for sure. Read somewhere on Substack that if we're in the era of the $2 champion, his argument was that Rocky Pennington, Dracus du Plessis, and Bilal are not as good as the belt should represent. Do you agree? In my opinion, it's really reductive since divisional landscape is different. If you're a champion that has defended, then they have something going on for them. I agree. I mean, I think that you're the best fighter at that given moment in the weight class. You have to realize that, like you said, the divisional landscape changes a lot. And you can look back at UFC history and you could make that argument several times. You could look at women's featherweight at Jermaine Durandamy and say that. You could look at who else was kind of a champion that didn't really like. You could look at Nico Montano and feel that way. Champions that people didn't feel like should deserve to be in that spot, that won the belt in ways that they didn't feel like they deserved. I don't know that that's an era that we're in. It's just the way these belts line up. I mean, I do think that Bilal is the best guy. He's the champ at welterweight. He's beaten Leon Edwards. He's beaten Gilbert Burns. Though that was kind of both guys were injured, but he's on this long unbeaten streak. So, I mean, you got to respect what he's done. You even got to respect what Raquel Pennington has done. I mean, all she's done is succeed in the fights that were given to her. Bantamweight as a whole for women, not that strong, but she's done so. Like, the fact that she's the best in her division doesn't mean that she's not a good fighter. It's just that the division is not that strong. But I mean, you can't fault her for winning the belt, you know. So these are the last I'll take for today. I believe Yuju Sang should be a lock for next season as well. I think he has a fight scheduled. I think I just saw that he has a fight scheduled for end of October in an AFC versus Heat fight event. So he's pretty good. He's a Korean guy that I think should be there. What weight classes do you think they do for next season? I think that they will do. I would think that they'll probably nix strawweight next year. There just isn't enough talent coming back up, you know. And I think that they bring back lightweight would be my guess. I think that there's enough that they could pull it together, especially since they took a year off. So I think they bring back lightweight. I think that they would nix strawweight. I mean, who do you bring for strawweight besides atom weights moving up and you could the semifinalists, you could bring back them, but I wouldn't bring back any of the quarterfinalists, the opening rounders. So do Yeah, probably back to the originals. Well, there you have it, folks. There's today's podcast. Thanks for joining. Really enjoyed the questions today. Yeah, we've got Road FC this weekend. We've got Matrix Fight Night this weekend. We have a deep show this weekend, but I'm wondering if some of these Japanese events are going to be affected by the tsunami. Hopefully that whimpers out, doesn't cause too much damage. Otherwise, guys, keep it locked to my channels for the latest news, and we'll see you next week.